everybody. Happy Memorial Day. All right, so today, before we get started, let us know where you're from and what your name is. So what's your name and where are you from in the chat? All right, so today we're going to be talking about writing lyrics and how to get started writing lyrics. All right, so if you've been writing songs or something that you want to get involved in, and maybe you don't have a whole lot of experience doing that, and you would like to learn more about it, you'd like to be able to start off in a way that's going to help you write better lyrics, not get stuck on things. I brought in a very, very special guest, friend of mine that I've known for many, many years, and that is Diana de Cabarrus. Hello, Diana. All right. Good to have you here.
Hello.
There we go. Now we hear you loud and clear. Very good. So, Deanna, I'd like to discuss. Let me back up. I didn't mention this. Deanna is an expert on lyric writing, among many other things, and a songwriting and lyric writing coach. So she knows what she is talking about. I didn't just, ask some person at random to come here and, hey, do you know anything about lyrics you want to talk about? I went to the best person that I know on this topic to bring her in for this, and that is, of course, Deanna. Okay, now, that being said, Deanna, I'd like to discuss some simple and maybe some easy ways that a person with maybe little experience or no experience writing lyrics, but maybe they have written or at least played music before on their guitar or piano or whatever, how can they get started writing lyrics? Because I can imagine that a beginning lyric writer might sometimes feel frustrated that writing good lyrics is harder than they think it should be, especially when they start. How can people avoid that feeling, deal with that? How can they get started and not feel frustrated because it's new to them, or maybe it's harder than they thought it might be when they began?
Well, I think it's really interesting, this question of how hard should something be? Why am I finding this hard? Should I find it easy? Because I think a lot of the time there are certain creative pursuits that seem like they exist in a really informal context. So you've got this kind of idea of the songwriter or the kind of, there's songwriting and popular music exist culturally within the realm of an art form that belongs to all of us. And there's a really strong DIY ethos in a lot of that, punk and folk and grassroots, and the idea that we all have the right to express ourselves and the means to express ourselves in this medium. And that's one of the things that's very exciting and immediate and direct about it. But it can easily create the sense that this should be easy, that because it's accessible and because there are a lot of artists who appear to have just sat down and written these songs that have become very popular or that really connect very effectively or that are very expressive or becoming very, very well loved, that therefore, if that doesn't happen to me, and if I don't find it just as easy, then there's something wrong with me, or if this is not something I'm going to be able to do. So, and I think the other part of that is that because we use language every day and we consider ourselves, by the time we're in adulthood, we can use language fairly confidently in our everyday interactions. I really doubt that anyone on this stream is nervous about how it's going to go if they walk into a shop and buy a bunch of bananas. Everyone's, I'm sure, very, very confident in their ability to use language to accomplish those kinds of day-to-day tasks. And because songwriting and lyric writing also uses language, we can imagine that our skill in normal use of language should translate into lyric writing. And I think that's partly because there are some creative fields, including music, where we have that go on a spectrum from really advanced and technical to anyone can do it. And I think a good analogy for this is iPhone or smartphone cameras. So if I'm in a really beautiful place, it's going to be quite hard not to take a good photo on my phone. If there's an incredible sunset and I just do that, well, iPhones don't do that, they do that, but it's going to be hard for me to mess that up. I'm probably going to be able to take a decent photo of that, but that doesn't mean that I actually know why it's a good photo, or that I'd be able to take any other good photos, or just because I've taken a lot of photos, I understand why one photo is better than the other photo. I might know that I like it better, but I don't really know why. So I think whereas a photographer knows exactly how to consistently take really good photos because they're using ideas to do with composition, contrast, color, framing, but the proportion of the objects, how the objects within the frame relate to each other. And so they understand how to interpret the elements available to them and combine them in ways that communicate an effective image. But me with my iPhone, I don't understand that. So it's going to be hit or miss. And I think I know that and I understand that. So I don't expect to always take good photos. And I don't really, the photos that I might take aren't necessarily to enter into a photography competition. I'm taking them for other reasons. But I'm really drawing that analogy because I think the assumption that we should be able to do something that we've never done before really bears examining. There's actually no reason that we would be able to do it or that we would find it easy, apart from the idea that songwriting exists within this culturally accessible art form. But why do we think that? We think that because it's presented to us that way. But there are lots of reasons why it's presented to us, why it would be presented to us that way. Like it's when songwriters are interviewed by their album about their latest album or their latest release, they're never saying, well, I just, I got chord progression number 5 from the 12 most popular chord progressions, and then I wrote I picked a topic, and it's never like that. They always are describing it in these quite mystical terms, or these terms that are very specific to that person and that circumstance, because it's more exciting and it makes a much better story. And the music industry is designed to sell artists and sell tickets and sell albums, so of course they're going to go for that angle. And most of us only really interface with songwriting as fans to begin with. That's where we generally get our first interest from. So that all of those things combined really can contribute to create in us the impression that either we should be able to sit down and just come out with these great lyrics, or perhaps we're just like not going to manage it. We're not going to be talented in lyric writing. So perhaps the first way of dealing with this and is to break that down and to consider that it probably will feel challenging, and that is completely expected. And it's not a bad sign. It's not a sign that you're not going to be able to do this, or you're not going to have what it takes, or you're not going to be able to express yourself effectively. This is normal and expected. You are on the right track if you find this, not the wrong track. A bit like, if somebody learns guitar and they're like, how long will it take me to get good?
Yeah, exactly. So what you're saying is when you're starting out, and if it feels challenging or hard or frustrating, it just means you're a normal person doing a normal thing. And people tend to go through this most of the time when they're starting out, and maybe even beyond the beginning stages. Like, writing good lyrics is real work. It doesn't just happen effortlessly, even for great songwriters. They tend to take their time and refine things, etc.
Sure. I mean, I've been playing guitar for like 30 years now. I find it really hard still. So that it's normal that it's going to be hard, because you're always going to be at the edge of your knowledge and ability. And there are some other things that are hard about it. So despite the mismatch between the expectations that are set for us by how we tend to encounter the idea of songwriting, how we tend to be drawn to it in the first place, there are other specific reasons why it's going to feel hard that you may not have thought of. So one of the most basic attributes of any kind of creative activity is making decisions. So whether we're making the decisions instinctively or consciously and deliberately, that's what's happening. It's which note or which chord or which color or which line or word is going to come next. Where is it going to go? What order is it going to come in? What are we going to hear before? And if you think about what we're actually doing when we're writing lyrics, we are choosing a set of words to communicate an idea, to create an experience for the listener. We're using those words as a connecting bridge between our sensibilities and an idea that we have, and the sensibilities of the listener. That is a really specific objective and a really specific way to use language. It's very different to the way we use language in our day-to-day mundane way. If I want to order a pizza, or I want to ask somebody to move their car, or if somebody wants to ask me if the seat next to me is taken on the bus, those are much more Sorry, I don't know why my computer does that. Sometimes it does a weird thumbs up. Thumbs up to everyone online. If that way of using language is a lot, it's referring to something concrete, simple. It's very easy for that meaning to be transmitted between me and the person I'm speaking to. But when you're talking about something much more nuanced and internal, to communicate that is a whole different order of detail. And we should not necessarily expect that to be as easy to access as the other ways we use language. So the types of conversation, if you think about 5 conversations you might have had today, they were probably all of a similar nature, you know, unless you were at work or discussing something, you know, in your field as an expert. The kind of conversations you're going to have out and about will be that kind of, you know, do you have any more of these bin bags? You know, they're going to be all of that. Typically, those are the conversations we have the most. Do you sell this particular type of charger? Yes, we do. Here you are. Thank you. Here's my money. It's very easy to exchange that kind of information successfully using language. We don't have to think about it. And that type of interaction is much more transactional. But the level of nuance and detail and the aspiration for the communication that we're trying to achieve is totally on a different level for songwriting. So it's just a different category of thing, and therefore it's not surprising that it's going to require a different level of effort and some different techniques to get there. And we can imagine that the hard part is in knowing where to get the ideas and to like get the words down on the paper. But the hard part is really knowing what to keep and knowing what to discard and having any sort of systematic way of making those types of decisions in order that we can accurately evoke that nuance and detail and the flavor that we want to transmit and communicate. So there's so many decisions that can easily cause paralysis. But it's not really the paralysis of the blank page so much as the paralysis of how do I make all these decisions. And so when you unpick it, that tends to be the part that's hard. Because if the only means of making those decisions is, well, I kind of like this, or I kind of don't like this, that is impossible. Because one minute you like something, the next minute you don't like it. It's really vague. And then you might feel like you can trust your instinct in one moment and that you don't trust it in another moment. So the other aspect when it comes to making decisions is that we have, you know, 150,000 words in common current usage in the English language, and you know other languages are going to have their own multiple 100,000 words. That number's going to be slightly different, but it's still going to be a lot of words. But if we had a song that had 25 chords in it, we'd think that was a ton of chords. Most pop and rock songs are going to have far fewer chords. And so the decisions there are on a whole different order of magnitude as well. And you may not have any kind of criteria to use apart from, does this feel good? And that's just doesn't feel very reliable. So that can be very frustrating, because also, even if you think, no, it doesn't, okay, well, why not? Now you don't know, and now you're just stabbing in the dark for something that feels better, but you have absolutely no guidance as to what it is that you're looking for. So all of that is hugely hard and almost guaranteed to make you feel frustrated. So those are all really, hopefully that's giving people a little bit of context as to why, if you don't find it hard, you're probably not paying attention.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, all right. So now that we know that it's writing good lyrics or lyrics that we're happy with is challenging and it's going to be hard and frustrating at times, what can someone do who's at the beginning of their lyric writing experience? What can they do to sort of overcome some of that frustration?
Well, I think in terms of just dealing with the emotional material of that, we can feel embarrassed, or we can feel like we don't want to show anyone what we're doing, or we can feel like it's no good. I think it's absolutely, you know, it's important to acknowledge that sometimes it's going to feel frustrating and maybe you're going to need to take a break and come back later. But I think part of the frustration is a message. This is something you care about. We don't get frustrated about things that are not important to us. So you can take that frustration as a sign that you've got a level of investment in wanting, in that this is a strong area of desire for you. And that is a very positive and helpful thing. That's like useful information for you. If I were to get bad feedback about the fact that I am not good at speaking Norwegian, like that has no negative emotional baggage for me, because I'm just not at all invested in that. Whereas, yeah, I would think, there are other things I am invested in that I'd care more. So in terms of how you navigate that frustration, if you can take a pause and understand that it's communicating to you, this is something that's important to you, then it becomes something of a positive, because you're essentially getting reliable information as to where it is that you want to invest yourself and what it is that matters to you. And being in a situation where you don't have any feelings about anything at all, and there's nothing you care about, nothing you're interested in, is actually much worse than experiencing frustration, because what you're doing doesn't yet conform with your desires. So you could almost be grateful for it.
Yeah, great point. If you don't feel frustrated, you're either incredibly awesome at everything, or you just don't care that much to improve and make it better. That's a very strong point. One thing that I wanted to have you maybe speak on is what happens, or how do you deal with, you've got someone who's maybe a songwriting student of yours, or whatever, and they're embarrassed to share what they're writing or what they're working on, because they're afraid of criticism, or they think it's not very good, and they're just very shy about letting anyone see it or get feedback on it. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that's first of all, it's really natural, and again, it's personal, so there's going to be some vulnerability, and that's normal. It just, again, it's another thing that lets you know this is something that's important to you, that you care about. And I think you can be quite gentle with yourself to start with, and there are two answers I have for that. One is to be very choosy about who you share your ideas when they are at an emergent state. So, for example, some people are not going to be qualified to give you very good feedback. So it would not be a good idea to share your work with those people. I know that, for example, my dad is only going to be happy when I write an operatic song cycle about Orpheus and the underworld, something which is not at the list of my priorities right now. So I'm not going to ask him for feedback. But and I'm kind of joking, but that point applies. There's going to be some people who they just aren't qualified to give you good feedback, and if they say something, it's not going to be helpful. So don't show it to those people. Be fussy about who gets the opportunity to give you feedback, and find people that are going to be qualified, both in terms of the considered and constructive way they're going to engage with your material, and in terms of their own knowledge. So that's one answer, just to be quite fussy about who you share work with, and you don't have to share it with a lot of people. Another point is, whilst it's normal to feel protective about something that's very personal, especially if you're pretty good at guitar or at something else, and now you feel you're used to feeling quite proud of what you're able to do, or used to be able to count on a certain skill level, and now this feels a lot harder. That's, of course it's going to feel a bit like, but if you can't give yourself permission to produce primitive or crude early work on the way to becoming more fully realized in your skills, then that's something to get curious about as well, because it may indicate some perfectionism. We should not value ourselves simply according to our achievements. It's natural to want to achieve, and it's healthy, but our value is not the same as the quality or output of every single thing we try to do, and we have to separate those things. So if you are at a point where you are so unwilling to share something because you're so identified with it, it might be worth thinking, okay, is it more important to me where is this fear of criticism coming from? Is it more important to me to protect myself from that, or is it more important to me to give myself the opportunity to develop? Am I willing to be stopped in my tracks by this?
Yeah, super great point. And I can certainly relate to all of this in terms of being on the teacher side. I don't teach lyrics, but among my students, it's oftentimes the better students, the ones that are more advanced, who are more afraid to play in front of me. Where the people who are less experienced typically don't have those fears. Some of them don't have those fears, but a lot of them that are really advanced, I mean, even professional level players, they don't, their ego gets in the way where they're afraid of, well, if I play something in front of him and I make a mistake, maybe he will see me as some sort of lower in status than I think he already sees me at, or whatever. So sometimes ego gets in the way, not only for inexperienced writers or players, but also at the higher levels too. They're very productive. I have a very good friend, one of my best friends in the world, actually, had sent me a bunch of songs that he had written and recorded demos, and he's singing on the songs. And he's not a singer at all. Trust me, he's not a singer. Okay. He's a great player, a great songwriter, but he's not a singer. And he is singing the vocal lines that he imagines on the song. And, the singing is not good, but and he would never share this with anyone else. But the reason why he shared it with me is that he knows that I can hear not what he's actually doing and the mistakes that are big, but what he's trying to do. So the reason I'm bringing this up is he was very selective, is exactly as you suggested, about who he shared these demo versions of these songs with, him singing on it with. Because if he had shared this with, I don't know, some of his other friends that may not be musicians, they would hear the questionable singing and think, oh, this song is bad and this is not good. And, but when he shares it with me, he knows I'm not listening to what's actually coming out of his voice. I'm listening for the songwriting potential there. And I think that when people are writing lyrics or writing songs of any kind, exactly as you said, being selective on who you seek to get feedback from is important. You want someone who's going to give you useful, constructive feedback and understands kind of where you're going, even if it's not there yet, but understands what you're trying to accomplish and then has ways or suggestions to help you get there, instead of someone else who might only be able to look at the surface level and then make a value judgment, good, bad, or mediocre. And there's nothing useful to come out of that discussion, really. I think maybe that's kind of what you were getting at a moment ago, Deanna.
Yeah, and the example that you've given is a perfect example of that. This friend of yours understands that you're going to be able to evaluate the compositional ideas and not be distracted by the current aesthetic technical presentation of the material, and knows also that it is not in your nature to knock somebody down. So knows that you are somebody who can be relied upon both from an integrity point and character point of view to be constructive, but also has the relevant knowledge. And so there's the two components in terms of the places from which we can get feedback. But yeah, I think this question of perfectionism and understanding, deliberately giving ourselves permission to make crude or primitive work and not feeling like we're going to be defined by that is also important. And it's quite worth examining what that's about if we feel so defined by the need to be excellent right off the bat that we can't do anything. And I had a little bit of early success with my first releases in the UK, getting some radio play and managing to tour and all of this. And I really didn't know how that had happened. And I did get a little bit invested in terms of equaling that in subsequent releases. And I sort of realized I was becoming a bit inhibited because of it. I had to definitely scrape that little bit of ego off the windscreen. So it is very important not to get in your own way in that respect. The other point I was going to make on that is that you can become qualified up to a point to give yourself some feedback. But that comes with in order to be able to do that, you have to know what it is that you're looking for. So if there are guitarists who are watching this, they might have, let's imagine that there's a guitarist who's working on the improvisation and their plan for that is they're going to go to blues jams. And so they may be doing some draft recordings at home to play some ideas and see how they sound. And if they might be thinking, okay, well, I want there to be like a little bit more of an exciting bit towards the end of the solo where we feel like it's building. So they already are listening out for certain things. They can record themselves, they can listen back, and they can listen out for whether they're achieving that or not. And then they might hear some other stuff that they're like, oh, rhythm was a bit off there, or so they've learned in that situation, that guitar player has learned some criteria by which he or she can coach themselves. And there are things that you can learn in lyric writing that you can use to coach yourself. So that's another part of it. And one example of that would be to look through your draft and see what the balance of language is. So if I tell you all not to think of a big red London bus, you actually can't help thinking of a big red London bus, because the way that your brain processes information, it's sort of instantly made a model of it. But part of the reason for that is I used concrete language. Those things, big red bus, London, they all immediately evoke an image in your mind. If I said, don't think of the winds of time, it's a bit easier because that's an abstract concept. We don't really know what that looks like. What does time look like? So one just very simple but very effective way to audit your lyrics is to look through and see what the balance is for those two different categories of language, things that are concrete that you can picture in your mind versus things that are abstract. If we have only abstract language, it becomes hard to keep paying attention. We sort of like drift off and tune out. Up to a point, perhaps a song with a lot of abstract language could compensate for that by having really strong musical hooks, but then we're like missing the point of what lyrics can offer a song. So that's like, for example, that's just one example of a way that you could coach yourself and give yourself feedback. There are other ways as well. So, but in terms of how we would approach that dilemma of feeling like we don't want to go and get feedback from somebody else, the first part is one, just like investigating for yourself where that attitude is coming from, and just really asking yourself whether you're willing to be stopped by it. Secondly is finding the right kind of environment for appropriate feedback and the right kind of people. And the third is learning some ways in which you can start to give yourself feedback. So the categories of language thing is one, but there are others.
Super, super great points. And that actually reminds me of something. When you talked about ways that you can coach yourself, I think about this in terms of what standard are you using to evaluate? Or when you are seeking feedback from somebody else, and this is true whether you're seeking feedback on your singing or songwriting, lyric writing, guitar playing, a solo that you've improvised, whatever it is, if the standard is it good or not, that's really vague. Good or not is partly subjective, although there are some objective criteria in there, but it's too big of there's no target to hit. What is good? But if you describe something very specific, I'm trying to express these specific feelings in this order throughout this song, through the lyrics, or in a lead guitar part or whatever, how accurate do you think, or do I think, this music or lyrics or guitar playing, whatever it is relative to that objective, that standard? So when I evaluate myself, that's the standard that I use. I'm trying to express these things. How accurately am I currently doing that with my guitar playing? But if you were writing lyrics, it would be similar. And that doesn't necessarily mean, in terms of lyrics, pointing out putting every word on a spoon and making it really obvious what you're talking about, even if you're sort of hiding some of the meaning of what's going on. If you know what's trying to be expressed, how artistic or how expressive is that in expressing that goal versus is it just good or not? I think that kind of ties into what you were saying earlier.
Yes, that's very comparable. I would say it's a very comparable point. There's something else in there though, which is, and you said that when you are sort of giving yourself feedback on a work in progress, you are listening back to see how accurately the emotions that you had in your mind are being expressed by the music. But there's a step before that, which is knowing what it is that you want to express. And the reason that I'm pointing that out is that we can get very hung up on, is this good? And how is it good? And what can I do to make it better? But that's almost like an overlay on top of the kind of essence of what art is about, which is communicating something. If you become so hung up on, is this good or not good? You find you can easily get inhibited at which point it is far harder to accurately tap into something that you want to express than if you were a little easier on yourself in terms of what's the result going to be, what's the quality going to be, are people going to like it? Because the more strongly you can identify what it is that you want to express, the more directly, the easier of a time you're going to have to translate that into something which, even if it's a little crude, is actually going to contain that energy and is going to be expressive. So there's all the technical stuff around how we use language and how we put songs together and how we might have rhyme schemes and how the sound of the language works and how the meaning of the language works and how the ideas might be ordered. But then there's also the energetic component that we need to nurture as well, which is how fully am I able to tap into my own instincts and identify them? And if we're always looking at ourselves and our work from the outside with an evaluating lens, and we don't spend enough time inhabiting the internal state, it can be hard to get that energy strong enough to propel us through the learning experience. Does that make sense? And is that something you have any thoughts about when you're in terms of your own compositions?
Yeah, well, yes. Going back one step further, you said you've got to be thinking about what it is you're trying to express before you concern yourself with the accuracy of your ability to express it. And I couldn't agree with that more. I think that the true starting point, and I skipped over it earlier, but you nailed it on the head. You've got to have something to say, right? There's some people who pick up a guitar or start writing a song or start writing lyrics, and you listen to it or you look at it and you wonder, what's trying to be expressed here? What is the purpose of this? Are we just putting sounds together, putting words together, putting chords and notes together just because, and see what happens if it sounds cool? I guess you could do that. For me, I don't approach music that way, and certainly don't approach guitar playing that way. I've got a lot to say, and I've got some specific things I want to say, and all of my playing, my learning, my practicing goes into trying to become as accurate as I can with what it is I'm trying to say. I'm very driven by the why I'm trying to say what I'm trying to say. And that, we're getting a little off topic, but that motivates me to want to always refine whatever skills I have and try to acquire new ones or to get better at the ones that I have. It's because I'm driven by why I play guitar in the first place and what I'm trying to say. I don't just randomly make stuff up just because. So that's just me. That may not be everybody, but having that starting point of what are we trying to express? Why is it important to you? Is a great starting point. And then what are the tools? How can I more accurately express this? How can I refine, whether it's guitar playing or lyrics or chord progressions or whatever, to make that as accurate or as expressive as I can, given the current level of skills you have, whatever those are. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing that I wanted to ask you, we're going to get into some questions here from some of the viewers, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you about before we do is what happens, or what would you say if people feel like maybe they don't have any natural creativity or they don't have a talent for this, to write good lyrics or great lyrics, and that they think they must be inherently lacking the creative skills, and maybe they feel hopeless that they won't ever be able to write lyrics that they can feel proud of. You kind of addressed this earlier in the beginning, but if we could put a little finer point on it, because I think a lot of people just think that, they look at someone like you and they think, well, she's great at it. Of course, they don't see all the work that's went into it, behind the years of developing your own skills. But sometimes they just assume that people have natural talents and others don't. And if they don't, then what's the point? Can you speak on that maybe a little bit?
Sure. Well, again, I think this goes back to examining our assumptions and really considering, is this a valid assumption that people who can do this have natural talent? I mean, none of us think that it's a good idea for somebody to get in a car and start driving it with no instruction. There wasn't a person born who had enough natural talent to drive a car safely with no instruction. So and yet we don't think that only geniuses can pass their driving license. We pretty much expect that we're going to be able to pass it eventually, even if it takes us a few goes. So I would say that if somebody feels like it's a hopeless cause because they are not sure because they can't imagine how they would be able to arrive at something that equals the sort of amazing, powerful finished result of an artist that they might really love, or their favorite songs. They're like, well, how can I possibly get from here? Like the distance is too great. This is a hopeless case. It's worth noticing how much it means to you if you feel like that, and that motivation can be very powerful and you can use it. So I really think that the only reason we think something is natural talent is because we don't know what the components of it are. Anything that you don't understand how it happened has the veneer of magic. But once you know what it is and how the moving parts are operating, now it's not magic anymore. So let's imagine a car. So a car can only really go as fast as its, it can only really be as good as its least good components. And a musician can only really play a solo limited to like whatever the quality of the solo overall is going to be limited by the area which they're weakest in. Like that's going to sort of be the limiting point on their performance. But they can work on all of those areas. We could replace all of those components in the car. So with lyric writing, I would say the idea of natural talent only presents itself because you don't yet know what the moving parts are and how you can get good at them individually. And once you start getting into it, that fear goes away a little bit. Also, negative emotions are to a great extent dispersed by activity. If your self-esteem is dictated by how good you are at something, you can disconnect it from achievement and reconnect it to effort. And then you can undertake things and you can feel good about the process and what you're exploring and what you're discovering, and slightly detach your emotional interpretation simply from how good you think the result is. Sorry, I just pulled my computer cable out, but I put it back. That's why I had to.
No problem. While you're dealing with that, one thing I wanted to do here is put a question on the screen from Roberto. The question is, this is slightly off topic, or not off topic, but slightly different than what we're talking about. But the question is, I'm curious to hear whether it is best to compose a song and then make changes to suit the singer's vocal range, or write the song based on the singer's range. So do we consider the singer's range and write the song, or do we write the song and then make adjustments along the way based upon who's going to be singing it? What are your thoughts on that? Since you both write songs, play guitar, and sing, you would certainly be great to answer this question.
So you definitely want to gear things around the vocal range of the singer, but it doesn't really matter at what point you do this. So if I was to invite you all at home to start singing the song Happy Birthday, you would all start singing that in a range that was vocally comfortable for you, naturally. It doesn't really matter at which point you change the key to suit the singer's range, because it's not that hard to change the key of a song. It's something you don't even necessarily have to do it. You could record it and then put it in Transcribe or one of those apps that changes the pitch, and experiment with which key was the best for the best for the singer, and then you could transpose the chords to that key or figure out what key it was in. So I don't think it matters at which point in the process you do it. Perhaps if I was going to think about this for a second, I would say write the song in the key that allows you the most expressiveness in the instrument that you're playing. Then figure out because that's, you won't be limited, you won't be hampered. You'll be able to like really find all the ideas that you want to find. And then once you've established what the key is, you can change it. If you feel like that would be a massive technical pain in the behind, then you could just make sure you were in the singer's range to begin with. But also sometimes it's not simply there can be keys that are quite close to each other. There might be a few keys where the singer can handle, and just a very quick, the easiest way to choose the best key for the singer. Obviously they're going to be limited by what their high notes are, but taking their lowest note in their range and making sure the lowest note in the song doesn't go lower than that. That's how I typically advise people. If that means that their highest note is too high, you might just need to adjust the melody a bit. But yes, so in general, it's never going to be a good idea for the singer to strain.
Yes, exactly. All right, here's another question. I'm not 100% sure I understand what is being asked here. Maybe you do. This is from Fernando. Are there any strategies you could please share to link writing lyrics to developing the music in a song or sections of a song you are trying to develop? I can interpret this question a couple of different ways. And I'm not sure, Fernando, if you want to add some clarification in the chat, that might be useful. But I think maybe what's being asked here is, if you are writing lyrics, how might that determine what the musical choices you make in terms of the chord progression or the riffs of the song?
Great. So there's lots of ways we can think about this. A very helpful way is to think about how much contrast each part of the song needs overall and where the contrast is going to come from. So, and it also is, what element do you want to foreground? So right at the start of the song, things need to be very clear to the listener. The listener needs to understand what's going on. Otherwise, they're going to kind of possibly tune out and stop paying attention, and it's going to be hard for them to pick up the threads of that song later. So at the start of the song, you probably would want to make sure that the listener is not really distracted by lots of multiple other elements. They can really hear the opening part of verse 1 clearly, because typically that's going to set up the main tensional problem or scenario that the song is going to explore. So we need to know what that's going to be. You may also want to make sure that where there's more information in the lyric being transmitted, things are not crazy in the musical elements. So if the melody is like very, very ambitious and very agile and going all over the place, we're going to be maybe listening more to that than the words. So one of the decisions that's going to dictate what musical choices you make at different points in the song is going to be, what do you want to foreground, and what should be the thing that people notice the most when they listen to this part of the song. Then there's a question of what's come before and what's come after, and how much contrast do I need. If I really want someone to pay attention to the words, I'm maybe not going to be changing chords every 2 beats. I'm not going to be having a really, really busy loads of instrumental riffs and things like that. I'm really going to leave a lot of space for the vocals to be heard and the lyrics to be heard. So that's one aspect of it. And now connecting the words. The other thing is, what is this section intended to communicate emotionally? And this goes back to what Tom Hess was saying a few minutes ago. If there's a certain emotional register that I'm trying to communicate, let's say nostalgia, maybe there's going to be things that I can do in the lyrics and the music that will all work towards that same expressive goal. And so that might be, to me, that would suggest a slightly slower tempo, a rhythm that was not really, really busy, so not tons of subdivisions, quite melodic note choices, not like loads of tension, quite consonant note choices, and I probably would not have a very, very high rate of chord change, and I probably would not have very super surprising chord choices. So there would be a lot of flow. So that's an example. On the other hand, if I wanted drama, maybe now there would be more subdivisions rhythmically. Maybe there might be rhythmic accents that might work on top. There might be various different kinds of rhythmic accents that build up a lot of tension and drama and anticipation. Maybe the chords would change more. Maybe I would have more tense and note choices, and maybe the way the melodic contours were of the vocal or other instruments would be going up. So that would be a couple of examples of different ways that different criteria one might use to make musical choices and lyrical choices. Is that in the area of what you were asking? And if it wasn't, please do ask a clarifying question and I will do my best to give you a more specific answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's what he was asking, but the answer was good regardless. That was good stuff no matter what. There's 2 more good questions here. I mean, there's more than 2, but there's 2 I want to focus on. Here's one. how would you simplify the ideas in your mind to be more musically useful as opposed to sounding like a paragraph in an essay? I think he means as it relates to lyrics, instead of just talking to someone and just saying sentence after sentence, describing from beginning to end whatever's trying to be expressed, how would you might break that up into lines? I think that's where he's going with this question.
Now, I think this is a really great question, because that is indeed the whole deal. How do we express something in as much detail as possible, as meaningfully as possible, in a very small number of words? You know, your average song lyric is going to have between 150 and 300 words in it. So each word is going to have to be quite carefully chosen. But I think how we do this is by, well, I know how we do this is by being very clear about what is most important to express, like what's the absolute nub of what we're trying to say, and how to, even though we want to boil that down and be concise. And I with my lyrics, there's always lots of drafts where we have to chop lots and lots of words, because I write lots of words and I have to get rid of lots of words. So how I talk at this kind of quite fast, voluble, large amount of words is how I also write lyrics. So lots of things have to go. So I would write the essay first, because that's, once you've written the essay first and you've done free writing, free associating, explore everything that lives in your idea. You might also want to do a little mind map. If it's a theme that you want to explore, you might look at a lot of different ways that theme might be expressed or experienced. And when you read back over it, there's going to be some lines that stick out more, that express that more effectively, that resonate more, that kind of like, oh yeah, that's it. That's what I want to say. That's, out of all of this stuff, that's the most important bit for this song. And you underline those, you take them out, and you start stacking them in sections. Now, it doesn't matter if they rhyme or not at this stage, you're still just seeing how changing the order of these different phrases is going to make the idea sing more and express it more clearly. And then you see, is there any fat that I can trim? Can I be more economical with how I express this? And is there another way of saying this with fewer words? So if I was writing a song the other day and I had this whole concept for it, and I was like, oh yeah, and then she turns down this, I'm not going to go into what it was, but I had written this whole progression for what was going to happen to this character in this song, and I managed to get it down to one line because I knew where she was going. But I only knew that because I'd written around it. So paradoxically, the path to expressing something concisely and accurately is exploring it quite expansively first. Is that helpful?
I think so. I think you hit it on the head when you talked about, you referenced the economical. You're starting off with all these ideas and you're trying to find the most maybe economical, as well as still accurate way of expressing what you're trying to do. So you're not just reading a whole, paragraph after paragraph like you're having a conversation, but you're trying to find the essence of what we're trying to say and how can we powerfully say that, get the point across in less words, because we don't have 10,000 words we're going to put into the lyrics. We have, as you mentioned, 100, 150, something like that. So those words count. I mean, they hopefully they count. So thinking about that economy, I think that's a really, really good point here that you made. Next one here is one that I was going to ask you. Anyway, how do I get started writing lyrics? So for people who haven't written much before, like our friend Mark here, he says, I've never written lyrics before, but I feel like I would like to learn to express myself, but I don't know how. I like it to be fun as I learn guitar. So how can they get started?
Firstly, it is fun. I encourage you to try this out. So the thing with writing lyrics is that when I started out writing lyrics, I thought that what writing lyrics was getting a piece of paper and a pen, writing the first line of the first verse and continuing till I'd written all the song. And in fact, this turns out to be the least good way of approaching songwriting. What I would do is think about developing a creative practice. So if you're learning guitar, let's say you have learned a scale and you know that scale is going to work in a certain key. And when it comes time to play in that key, you're not having to think about the notes too much because you already know where they are. You've already got access to that vocabulary because you practiced that scale. You didn't just play that scale once and discover that scale in the moment. You already knew that it existed and you got that vocabulary into your bag of things that you know how to do. And with lyric writing, an equivalent to that is an exercise called object writing. And this is really not about writing lyrics, but it's about getting words into your bag of tools in the same way that playing scales or learning scales and learning how to play scales in musically interesting ways is getting those into your bag of available tools. So object writing is really, it's a common songwriting creativity booster. And it's just when you take a prompt, so it could be the word puddle, you set a timer and you write everything you can free associating on whatever comes to mind with puddle, and you're using this through the prism of your 5 senses. And the reason for this is that, and I alluded to this briefly earlier, but I go into much more detail in a resource that I'm going to tell you about in a minute. But basically, if you have a balance of language in your songwriting that's to do with your senses, it's immediately it's a more vivid experience for the listener, and it connects with them in a direct way because that's how our brains process information, to put it in a nutshell. There's a longer kind of cognitive neural nervous system answer to that, but we don't really have time to get into that. But it's a known thing. So what's interesting is that this has always been a principle of good style in writing, and now the science has caught up to show us why. So object writing is a way of practicing accessing that kind of language very quickly and easily. So now it's not like a whole effort to think about those things. You're just able to work with that language. It's 5 minutes. That kind of free association also starts to give you a way to dredge up the things that you want to talk about, the things that you're interested in. In terms of what we were saying before, the first step is knowing what you want to express. It's not necessarily very apparent to us what it is that we really care about and want to say when we're put on the spot. Some people do know very clearly what it is they want to talk about, and other people know that they have a desire to express something but aren't sure what it is in the moment. And I'm probably in that latter category. And for me, if I'm not engaged in regular writing, I don't really know what it is I want to say. But as soon as I'm doing regular writing of any kind, it's not like lyric writing, it's just in a process of working with words, it becomes apparent what things are thematically presenting themselves to me. So there's 2 parts to this. There's having a regular writing practice as a way of knowing what it is you're interested in, and having a regular writing practice so that you become very comfortable and very sort of automatic with using the kind of sense-bound language that will make your lyrics enriched and direct and expressive. So that's immediately a recommendation I would make to you in terms of getting started with lyric writing. Just get a regular writing practice on the go a few times a week and pay attention to what's interesting to you. That's
awesome.
going to feed your sense.
Super great stuff. So we've got a couple of comments here. Just to kind of confirm, I think that you interpreted what was being said well. We have another one here from Fernando, Carlos. Great stuff. So I think that you're hitting it on the head here. Great stuff. All right. So Deanna, you have, I believe, a resource for people to check out. Yes?
Yes, I do. So I have this 5 Ways to Write Great Lyrics. Now, I released a bunch of albums which cost me a lot of sweat and blood and tears that would have been a lot less painful to do if I'd known the stuff then that I put in this ebook. So this ebook has I go into more detail about this idea of the categories of language that we touched on. It kind of makes it's just one of those things that's so obvious when you've had it explained to you, but there would be no reason to notice it beforehand. So if you did nothing else and you still absolutely stabbed in the dark with your lyric writing, but you did this, you used this idea about balancing the language in your lyrics, the quality of the expressive potential of what you're writing would immediately go up by a lot of degrees. So there's that, but there's also a bunch of other things. So there's a list of prompts, there's a writing calendar, there's a guide to how you can, the other biggest problem that I had when I started out was putting the big idea too soon in the song. So you write the first verse and then you've got no idea what to write next because you kind of said it all. And that's a question of how you're going to order the content in your song in a way that builds the idea and expands it and develops it and makes it more interesting for people and keeps them engaged. And lots of people have had the experience, who've tried to write lyrics, have had the experience of having what felt like a great idea, writing a verse and a chorus, and then having like really not knowing what we can do next without it sounding like we're just saying the same thing in different words and not in a way that makes it more intense. And so there's a section in that ebook that deals with how we can sequence our ideas so that we can unpack them in a way that's satisfying for the whole song. And that's something that really would have helped me a lot at an earlier point. So go download it because it's got some of my most key things that I've learned over the years.
Awesome. And you charge like $1 million for this, right?
Millions.
Now, this is totally free, everyone. So you can download that link, download that ebook. It's totally free from Deanna. Thank you, Deanna, for all the awesome stuff you shared today. Thank you for everyone who left good comments, good questions, participated. This is great stuff. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Deanna, for sharing everything that you did today. Super great stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for your questions. I've had a great time, and I hope to do it again another time in the future. Thank you.
We will, for sure. All right. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.